Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Chris Nicola. I lead our state government team at Esri. And today joining me will be Richard Leadbeater, who's the manager of our industry solutions team in the government sector, as well as Scott Ottman, who leads our state and local government solutions team. So today on our webinar, we're going to be focused on kind of reaching more voters and improving elections by leveraging location intelligence. Just as a note, our webinar today is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on our elections page shortly after the webinar is finished. As you have questions throughout the webinar, you can enter them in the questions panel, and we will be using kind of during the whole session on the right-hand side of your GoToMeeting panel. There's a spot for questions. If you enter them there as appropriate, we'll answer them during the discussion, but as any that we'll save for the end, we'll cover as well. So I think today what we'd like to cover is our solutions for kind of the election space. And as you can see here, we have solutions that are really the foundation of your entire elections process. But today we'll be focusing on elections outreach and transparency and open engagement with citizens. But we also have, as you can see here on the screen, solutions to simplify your elections day planning, ensure your elections day operations, and make sure those operations are successful. We have solutions for redistricting that allow you to complete and share regulation compliant redistricting plans. And we also have solutions for campaign management, right? Those running for office, tools to support analytics and targeting for your campaign strategy. What you'll see here is our kind of the 4 different areas that we do have election solutions. And if you go to Esri's elections page, if you go to esri.com and search for elections, you'll see information and details on all 4 of those distinct solutions. So the elections process really has gained kind of more attention than ever before, right? The importance to get voters out to vote has been a continued priority for all levels of government. Here you can see a whole handful of different news postings regarding long lines at polling locations, or the requirement to kind of quickly change polling locations due to safety, or long lines at polling locations, and being able to try to communicate those to the public so that they can kind of reprioritize their time, right? We see continued feedback, but the importance to get our voters to the polls is kind of #1 and has been kind of more of a priority than ever. So during today's discussion, we're going to discuss how you can leverage solutions to get voters to vote early, solutions for finding polls and understanding wait times so that they can plan the best time to vote, how you can communicate your elections results in ways to engage with your citizens and press on your election story. So we have a lot that we'd like to cover today. We're excited to cover the material with you. So to get us started, Richard, I'd like to transition over to you to get us started on the role geography plays in the elections process.
Thank you, Chris. For the sake of the audience, I want to take a step back and just go to some fundamentals that the entire election process is very geographically oriented. It's all about the voter, where they live, what jurisdiction they live in. So it's quite easy to say that geography plays a critical function, both in the setting up of election systems, the running of election systems, and just the tabulation of the results from the election day as it occurs. GIS is a fundamental part of successfully launching solutions that support election and our democracy. To set up some frame, I'd like to talk about geography and the ability to integrate, data, people, and knowledge. So to bring in this framework concept of the system of record, this is our voter registration databases. When you register to vote, you're entered, your address is there, what jurisdictions you belong to, even Do you show up at primaries? That history is all kept in a system of record. Today, we see more and more analysis of the election results and the histories of election. Who shows up? How many people show up? Are we reaching disenfranchised communities with our get out the vote efforts? And that's the system of insight that you see there. The ability to conduct analysis. And finally, the system of engagement. What's the results of our get out the vote campaign? Have we reached everybody? Have we reached everybody we needed? How do we communicate the operation of the election so that we have efficient voting lines, so that we can tell people when to come vote early? Maybe there's a line, maybe there's not. But more importantly, it's that transparency. Where's my polling place? Has it moved because of a hurricane or because of some other security issue? Or just has it moved since the last time you were voting, and you need to be informed to where it goes? So that there's many levels of engagement that the community needs to create with its citizens. Visualization of the data and analysis of the data is not a new thing. This is a map from the 1880s on voter turnout and how they voted in that particular election. And we can see that today we're using the technology to do more and more visualization and analysis of that data about where people vote, about how they're voting, about bringing in other information to create that insight that we talked about. And using this technology to do more and more on how to convey the message about who voted, how did they vote, and what were the results. This diagram shows the data process, the data flow that goes into collecting the voter information and assigning them and maintaining this critical information on who you are and where do you go to vote. And the nuclear element here is in the center of this swirl. It's the voter. You walk into the county, you've moved there new, or you just turned 18, and you walk to the counter and you fill out your voter registration card. From there, this data is entered into a database, quality assured, added, maintained into voter record file. That data is used to help get out the vote, do that campaign in that citizen engagement that we talked about. It's also maintained at the state level. Ever since HAVA was enacted, states are now having to maintain a central location of this data as a repository, but also check against other systems, check against your Department of Motor Vehicles, check against the criminal records, see if you actually are a resident of your jurisdiction. Are you able to vote? Have you passed away or have you moved? These systems are very data intensive, but they maintain the accuracy of the data rolls all the way down to bringing the data back to you when you go to register to vote and you go to vote. These processes, this information flow is a fundamental part of GIS, whether it's the citizen information, it's geocoding, the assignment to precincts, and then the maintenance of those tabular databases. And these are the results of that data. Applications that cover where's my elected official? Do I have wait times? What's the best time to come vote? Showing election results historically, helping people get to their election polling place, and am I in the right precinct at all? And then historical results. The two images in the bottom center are from King County, Washington, performing analysis of who do we reach, who shows up, and what percentages of those people show up and vote for the elected officials. As I said, elections are very data-centric. All of these attributes are quite commonplace to GIS professionals, and we're dealing with both points, lines, and polygons, very, very fundamental data formats. But election systems weren't created with GIS in mind. They're often a product of a legacy application that was very tabular centric. And then, as I said, the nuclear element is the voter, but that voter is assigned to a street. The street segment is assigned to precincts, and precincts create districts, all in a very fundamental but tabular point. So address placement, geocoding along street segments is the critical function of getting the data correct, getting the data to post in the proper precincts, in the proper school district, identifying the fire districts and the municipalities, all of the administrative polygons that we deal with day to day. But as I said, most of the data is very tabular centric. On the left-hand side, we see a typical description of a precinct. And you can see that vector geometry, polygons, really don't exist in these systems. But when geography is added to the process, we get a fundamental ability to quality assure our data, make sure it's in the right place, make sure that the data is assigned correctly to the administration. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Scott to lay out GIS, its role, its place, its evolution of where the technology is taking us, and the applications that are available to you.
Thanks, Richard.
Scott?
Sure, thank you very much. So I want to take a few minutes just talk about how ArcGIS is supporting the election process and election workflows within state and local governments. And before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about how ArcGIS as a product or as a platform has evolved. Historically, many would think of ArcGIS as the desktop software you use to manage that authoritative spatial data that Richard mentioned, roads, addresses, administrative areas, and maybe do analysis on that geographic information. Some of you may be using our server technologies to store that geographic information and begin to leverage it in real focused applications. And others have used some of our mobile clients to deliver applications to field workers. But we've been working to really expand the definition of ArcGIS to be much more than that, to be a modern web GIS platform that not only includes those capabilities I mentioned previously, but a whole new content management system that can be deployed on-premise in your organization or in the cloud with our SaaS offering called Arcgis Online. And when you deploy the web GIS system, you not only get all of the traditional capabilities that many of you may be using with ArcGIS today, but you also get a whole new host of content, configurable applications, and even solutions that we're going to spend our time today talking about. So today we're going to talk about a set of solutions we've developed for state and local governments, and specifically the elections offerings we have. And before I dive into the election solutions, I just want to take a minute to make sure you understand fully what ArcGIS solutions are. Essentially, when you deploy ArcGIS and begin to take advantage of all the capabilities that are available with WebGIS, you'll get with it a collection of useful maps and apps we call ArcGIS solutions. And these solutions really help you close the gap between our core software product offerings and what you do in state and local governments around elections. And each of these solution offerings are configurable and extensible and fully available, or freely available, I should say, and fully supported with the product. So one aspect of the work is the technology we're providing to close the gap between our core software products and what you do. But the other aspect of this work is the community of users we've developed and are developing to share best practices, get implementation support, and ultimately drive what we build in our solution offerings. So many of the election solutions I'm going to share with you today are actually a direct result of the feedback we got from local municipalities and state agencies across the country. And the third part of our solution offerings is a network of Esri professional services and partner offerings that can help you implement, sustain, and enhance the solutions. And as a team, our focus is really on making it easier for you as users of ArcGIS to take advantage of these capabilities, but we do know you may want to tap into that network of services and partner offerings to help you stand up new technology in your organization or maybe expand the capacity of your organization. So we're really laser focused on helping you deliver maps and apps quickly throughout your organization and really providing a standard set of capabilities within your election organization. And Richard talked about several of the capabilities that are important just in the outreach and public engagement aspect of election services. We also want to help you stay current with future releases of our technology so you can really maximize the investment you're making. Unlock the geospatial data so you can leverage it in many workflows throughout your organization. And Richard did a good job alluding to several of the data sets, that are used throughout the election process. And ultimately, we know we can't do this alone. We want to leverage the collective knowledge of the entire community. And so, as I mentioned, the solutions you'll see today are really a direct result of that collaborative effort between the teams at Esri working on our solution offerings, the community at large who's using them, and collectively we will all grow and share those best practices. So we're going to focus today on the election solutions, and the solutions I'm going to show you are really organized around the public outreach or public engagement aspects of an election process. What we'll show you today is a set of Arcgis configurations that help citizens discover where do they find their polling place and how long the wait times. Who's my elected representative? Where do I find, if you're in one of the 13 states that allows early voting, where do I find the drop-off location for my ballot? And then ultimately, maybe on election night or after the election, how do I see who won in my local precinct, county, or maybe even the state? The solutions I'm going to show you today can be applied by local agencies or state government agencies, and you can pick and choose exactly which solutions you'd like to use. So if you start to think about these solutions as a comprehensive system for your education and outreach, you'll see today the solutions interact with a set of kind of key layers, precincts, electoral districts, and maybe polling places and voting centers. They leverage results that are coming from your tabulation systems and ultimately bring that information together within Arcgis and can be delivered internally and externally to appropriate stakeholders. So you can have a whole series, through a series of focused applications like election polling places or election results. So it very much is a comprehensive system that works together for your outreach and education programs. So let's just dig right in and let me start with a series of demonstrations of the solutions. So to do that, I'm just going to bring up and start with the first solution called My Elected Representative. This is a configuration of a web application template that allows members of your community to go in and find their current elected officials, right? I may be looking, heading into the election, I may be interested in finding out who are the current representatives in my community. And I can just quickly enter in my address here and select that location. And what this will do now is drill through a whole series of local, county, and state, and even federal elected officials and provide a comprehensive single inventory of all of those elected officials. And it'll provide a way for me to directly link out to get more detailed information about any one of a number of elected officials that may be in my community. So this is a very simple way for members of your community to discover who their elected representatives are. And so, as I mentioned, in 13 different states across the country, they allow early voting. So the early voting solution is a configuration of web app builder that allows me as a resident to come in and discover where the nearest early voting center is. And so I can once again search for my address and locate the nearest voting center. In this case, the Bolingbrook Fire Station is just a couple miles away. I can get detailed information about that voting location and even, or that early drop-off location, and even directions to that if I'm not familiar with that facility in the community. So it's a real simple way for members of the public to discover where their nearest voting center is. The next solution I want to show is election polling places. In many states across the country, right, there's still precinct-based voting. And on election day, I may need to discover where exactly is my most recent polling place. So if I just come in and search for my address again, it's a real simple way. It goes through, discovers what precinct I'm located in within the community. It tells me where my polling location is. The other thing it does is tell me what the wait time is. So if I'm looking at this application maybe around lunchtime, I can get a sense for how the wait times might be at that polling location or determine whether or not I'd like to leave my place of business to go vote at this time. In anticipation of the election, it also gives me some information about the next election we're having in the community and what when I must be registered to do that. And ultimately, if I want to contact the election department for more information, I can do that. Much like early voting, I can get directions either from my current location or from my home to that voting location as well. So that's election polling places. It's an application that I can use in anticipation of the election to find out where I vote, and ultimately even on election day to see what the current wait times are. Now, some of you maybe
as you go through that, is the idea that a organization would implement that application like on their county or on their state webpage, so that as a citizen of that state or that county or that city, I'd go to that city or county or state's webpage, and there would be that polling place locator application for me?
Yeah, Chris, that's a really good question. Yeah, so any and all of those examples could be done, right? In some places, the state is really responsible for providing a single inventory of polling locations. In other places, the county clerk does that, and even in many parts of the country, the local town clerk. And here's a quick example of that same election polling places solution that I actually helped a local community here in Michigan stand up in anticipation of the primary election. So we spent about an hour and a half one Friday afternoon with the GIS professional in that community and took the solution that we provide and configured it for this township. And so now if you're a resident of Independence Township, Michigan, you can come in, search for an address, find that location, and much like the solution I showed you a second ago with sample data from Naperville, Illinois, you can now do that within this community as well too.
Great, thank you.
So really you have the flexibility, Chris, to deploy it as you see fit.
Perfect.
So some of you may be asking, within that polling place application, how do I get those wait times? How do I collect that information from the polling locations? Well, another complementary solution we have is called polling place wait times. And this is a configuration of our mobile application, Collector for ArcGIS, that can be used by poll workers or members of the clerk's office to really provide kind of current wait times in the polling location. And it's a simple way for them to identify the polling location they're working on and transmit those wait times back to that authoritative polling place layer that ultimately then is available to members of the public when they're looking at wait times in your polling place application. So we definitely provide a way for you to kind of capture that information from the field and essentially use your poll workers or a single poll worker, maybe at a polling place, as a sensor to continuously monitor the wait times within your community and ultimately share that information with the public. So let me shift gears a little bit and talk about election results. So to date, we've talked about how I can find out who my local elected representative is, or all of my elected representatives. I can discover where early voting centers might be located in my community, and even on election day, maybe discover which polling place I go vote in and what the wait times are at that polling place. Well, on election night, or maybe immediately the next day after the election, you may want to see what the results look like in my community. So the election results solutions allows me to get a geographic view of election results in my neighborhood. And those results could be represented at a precinct level, at a county level, or a jurisdiction level, at a county level, or even at a state level. You can decide how you best want to represent that information. And much like the applications I showed you previously, I can search for my home address and I can see what the results were in my precinct. And I can do that by the different candidates or contests. So in this case, President of the United States. Perhaps I want to come down and also look at how a U.S. representative voted, and maybe even see more generally what voter turnout was in my precinct. So the election results application can be used, as I mentioned, on election night, and it's a great way for clerks to provide a map-based view of those results that historically are generally transmitted to the public and to the press as a set of reports, tabular reports, but this allows you to provide a real map-based view of that information. And as I said, it can mine the information from your tabulation systems on a regular basis and provide that information to constituents in your community. The last solution I'd like to show you is the historical election results gallery. So imagine now I've had several political contests and several elections within my community, and I'd like to share kind of a single destination of all election results for maybe general and primary elections in my community, or maybe around a specific political contest. The election results gallery allows you to provide that single destination, and ultimately provides to constituents within your community a real set of focused maps that can look at things like voter turnout or how we voted in the last presidential campaign. And so this is an easy way for you to provide that single destination for us, for a select set of focus maps that really mine current and historical voter turnout or voting results in your community. And it really builds on multiple implementations of the election results solution as a whole.
So Scott, that's kind of interesting. I think something that you mentioned as you were showing the election results page, you mentioned that you could connect to their authoritative database, right? So we're kind of there. So does that mean, like, as that database is being updated, all of these maps are being updated in real time?
It's not quite that real time. I mean, you could, in theory, do that, but typically what we find is those election systems are very closed systems, right, for obvious reasons. And instead, what most organizations do who are providing applications like this is they actually extract information on a regular basis from those tabulation systems. And with this election results solution, we provide some tools that allow you to take tabular-based data with precinct information or with county or geography information and update the map layers. So you can see exactly, you know, that information in a tabular report and also on the map. It's rare that we see direct connection, Chris, but a lot of that depends on the system architecture of your tabulation systems in your organization.
Perfect.
But we definitely provide tools with the solution to make that easier for you.
So then, since the maps are updated with kind of live data, it gives the citizen the ability to search and kind of, you know, I guess, integrate with the data kind of any way they want. If they want to see kind of how different areas were performing or how many voters went in their neighboring jurisdiction than attended in their jurisdiction, right? They can They do that without it being kind of PDF maps. They have that ability to interrogate the data themselves.
Yeah, so as I change my extents here, right, I can not only see how my precinct voted, but how the neighboring precinct voted. I could also see, you know, how voter turnout looks at large across the entire community, and begin to get a sense for where do we have areas of the community that are, you know, have larger turnouts than others. Absolutely.
Great.
And in addition to just who won the election, right, I can see how many ballots were cast in any given geography. So I can start to get a sense for the number of voters that showed up at the polls that day. So I showed you several different solutions that are available today. Everything from understanding who my elected official is, where do I find voting centers and polling places, how do I you know, monitor the wait times and communicate that information to the public, and ultimately begin to tabulate and share, or actually share tabulation results in a map-based view on election night and even historical election results. All of the solutions I showed you today are actually available on solutions.arcgis.com. If you go to this site, you'll find everything I showed you today, and you'll be able to take each of these solutions for a test drive and then ultimately begin to go through the process to deploy them in your organization. And I mentioned how quickly communities can take advantage of them with that example from that small community in Michigan. So as I come down and maybe just focus for a minute on the local government solutions, you'll see if I go to the elections site here, all of the solutions I showed you today are available. And you can, as I mentioned, take some of the applications for a test drive or begin to dig into the detailed documentation that'll show you how you can stand up an early voting application in your community as well. So as I said early on in the presentation, our goal is really to kind of enable you with the right tools and technology to take our core Arcgis platform and configure it for your voting workflows and your voting needs in your community.
So Scott, one question that we get a lot is, you know, I think you showed a whole handful of solutions here that somebody could implement, but I think what does it really take in, like, how much time and skill set that's needed in order to implement these within an organization? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, maybe I'll just stay here and just use it as an example. So with this early voting solution, you actually get all of the technology you need to configure this solution in your organization. And we'll describe in the documentation, we describe exactly what parts of ArcGIS you need to stand it up, the applications that we're using to deliver it. When you deploy it in your organization, what are the kind of technical components you get? And ultimately any release notes, as we've evolved these solutions over time. And then we'll walk you through exactly how to deploy these in your organization. So we have some automated tools that help you deploy essentially the solution in your organization. And that's exactly what we did with our customer Independence Township. We sat down with them and we really had two pieces of information for this polling place application. We had a point layer that had their precincts, or I'm sorry, their polling locations, and we had a polygon layer that had their precincts in it. And with those two pieces of information, we were able to stand up this polling place application and brand it for their community in about 90 minutes. It didn't take us a whole lot of time. And so we provide all of the detailed documentation to really get you started. And then you can continue to refine it based on the feedback that you get from your stakeholders in your community. But ultimately, with the right information in hand, you can stand up many of these solutions in a matter of hours for your community.
And do you need like a GIS person or an IT person?
Certainly it would. I don't know that you need an information technology person because you have the system, your ArcGIS organization, to host the applications and to host the content. But certainly a GIS professional that understood the data that's required would be valuable for sure. So having a good partnership with that GIS person, or if you are the GIS person in your community, you can quickly stand this stuff up because the data, they're very simple data sets to work with.
Thank you.
Yep, sure. So those are all the demonstrations I had, Chris, of our election solutions. Why don't I turn it back over to you now and you can close and we can take some more questions.
Perfect. And I see some are coming in, so this is also a good time for the attendees to enter in any additional questions that you have. We'll cover those in just a sec. So I guess just in summary, Scott showed us kind of a lot of different applications there, right? And those are what we call our ArcGIS for election solutions. And Richard gave you a lot to think about just on kind of the importance of geographic information in that kind of elections process. I think what we focused on showing you today was kind of a smart way for you to power elections, right? With the ability to integrate maps and analytics and application configurations, you can guide early voting, locate election day polling places, share real-time election results. Scott showed us how to find your elected officials, which is, I think, really helpful for kind of day-to-day use with your citizens and just being able to communicate with your elected officials. What are the contact information for elected officials? Making it easy for your citizens to engage. And, I think we also highlighted in the beginning that there's other pieces of the elections process that we didn't dive into here today, but that you can definitely find more information on Esri's website. So at this point, I'd like to take some questions. We have a handful that have come in. The first one maybe that we can start with, which is a pretty straightforward question, is what are the cost of the solutions that Scott showed here today? So Scott, I can answer that if you want to answer that.
But you can take it, Chris. Go ahead.
Sure. So all of the ArcGIS for state or local government solutions, including all of the elections applications that Scott showed today, are included with your licensing of the ArcGIS platform. So as long as you have kind of the right Esri technology that powers those applications, the application themselves is just included, and we don't charge additional licensing fees for those applications. The other kind of key point for that is that all of those applications are open sourced. You can access them on GitHub if you need to modify them or add a button or brand them a little bit differently. And I think the most exciting piece, which Scott touched on in the beginning, was that all of these applications are supported so that you can call Esri technical support and get assistance with any one of those applications. So the next kind of question here is, Scott, you touched on it a little bit, but it might just take a second to, I guess, reinforce it. when you were going through and showing kind of your polling place locators, and it was showing the voter line wait times.
Mhm.
Can you highlight it, just maybe spend a second and describing that again? I think it was an important piece.
Yeah, so we really have two solutions there working together. We have the election polling place solution, which allows you to discover where the nearest polling or where the appropriate polling place is for you. And then we have a field mobility application that can be used by polling workers that allows them to periodically update the wait time on each polling place throughout the day. That could be an hourly update. You decide really what that frequency is. And because those two solutions are really connected together and using the same common polling data, it's a simple way for citizens to see in near real time what the wait times are in the community. So that's really how that comes to life. It's two solutions working together. One is a mobile application, a mobile solution that leverages our collector for ArcGIS application. You're using that to update the wait times at that polling location, and that information, that wait time information, is available then to citizens who use your polling place application.
That's great. So if I am somebody who's working at a polling place, I could have a app on my phone that I periodically go into, click, kind of understand the wait times, and quickly update it with a couple clicks, and then it's updating the system?
Absolutely. Yep. And the citizens are seeing that as soon as you submit that update.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Richard, maybe you can help us with the next one. There are a couple questions that were asked around, I think in the beginning of the talk, we spoke a little bit about kind of targeting voters and being able to communicate with different voters. If somebody wishes to target voters who voted, in the past maybe 4 years, or in the general election, but they're college age and they subscribe to certain media types, is there a way for you to be able to target those types of voters, right, in different ways?
Sure. So we didn't really touch on voter history files, but in the voting registration databases, not only is it you, where do you live, there's also history. So every time you show up, whether it's a general election, a primary, or a special election, there is a notation that you showed up. It doesn't tell you how you voted or who you voted for, but it just tells you that you were there, you participated. That's where they get the turnouts from. The nuclear element of that voting record, again, is your address. That's a piece of geography. And once you have a geocode for that, an X and a Y, or a shape file, point file, you can use that as any other data, just like a retailer does, just like the mom and pop dry cleaners who does a business analysis. You can take those points of voters and enrich them with demographic data. Often it's the case of you know the demographics, the census data about these communities, but do you know the lifestyle? And that's where often people are using databases like Community Analyst, where you're coming in and you're finding lifestyle of these people, who they are. Do they read the New York Times? Do they listen to the radio? Or are they country music fans? What ads do I want to place on what radio station or TV station? So once you have the base data geographically, enriching it with other information and doing further analysis is quite easy. As a personal aside, I was asked to help. They wanted to find Republicans with solar panels on their rooftop. Okay, but once we had that record in geography, it was quite easy to start to do that type of analysis.
Great. So I think as you're able to collect kind of voter history information, right, from kind of the database, you could say that, I've voted in the last kind of 5 primaries, right? And you can see that I'm somebody that traditionally goes, and you have a database of people, right, like me, that you can get that history information from. So as you described, you can go through and actually leverage some of the tools within like our Arcgis Online product to kind of take your history data and the information about my address and then add that additional demographic information that Arcgis Online provides you and make your data even more robust so that you can start to do that mapping and analytics to say, I want to target this type of voter, right, that has certain criteria, and I can start to dive into that.
Exactly. This is exactly what happens when you get the political phone calls. They've geocoded your name, and they know if you're an R or a D or an I or a G. They know your political affiliation. They know that you showed up or don't show up for primaries. So all of this is just history that is quite well versed, and it's quite well practiced. And there's lots of lessons to draw from.
Great, thank you. The next couple of questions, Scott, maybe for you. One of them is, I think you went through in a couple of your applications of finding polling place in the early voter application. You showed kind of finding my address, right? And then also routing me to kind of that closest poll. As you're doing the routing, is that, and I guess an additional fee in kind of the Esri licensing world?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is. Computing those directions or that route to a location does consume credits within our Arcgis licensing model. It's a very small number of credits, and as an organization, you can choose to enable that capability or disable that capability based on the services you want to provide to residents in your community. And you can also further throttle those capabilities as well. So you maybe only want to allow X number of routes to be generated. So there's a lot of ways you can mitigate any concerns you have with that. You could choose to just turn the routing on around the election time frame and maybe turn it off when people are just using it in non-election periods. But yes, it does consume a small number of credits that are outlined in the pricing model for an Arcgis organization.
Right, and I think as we think about kind of the translation from kind of that route to credits, I think when we think about small amount of credits, it's a significant amount of routes per a single credit.
Correct, yep.
So it's not kind of a couple credits as a route, it's significant amounts of credits in one credit, or routes in one credit, I should say.
Yes.
And we can share and maybe a link to our Arcgis Online page and kind of what costs credits and what doesn't in the follow-up questions to the webinar. Another kind of question along kind of that line, Scott, was, I think there are these applications, but what happens when there's an update to, the Arcgis Online product or even ArcGIS Enterprise or the underlying Esri technology? We have a version update. Yep. How does that work, and is there support for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the great benefits of leveraging the solutions we provide is that we ensure that they work with each subsequent release of ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Enterprise, and actually continuously evolve the solutions based on the feedback we get from the community. So with each release, we certify that the applications will work. And in many cases, you won't have to do anything because if there is a change, we'll take care of it for you. But if there is an update, you can choose to deploy the new version of the solution and leverage the content you have, or just continue to use the existing version you have. That decision is entirely yours. Our goal is just to make it easier for you to stay current and continuously evolve your offerings. But we take most of that burden on for you as part of the solution development process.
What about kind of additional enhancements? These products are out there and kind of as they are today, are you continuing to enhance them? And maybe a part B to that is, do you want feedback on kind of what our cities and counties and states kind of see with the applications and may find helpful? Yeah,
absolutely. We're always evolving these offerings, and we've actually got some plans for other aspects of the election process that we're thinking about for early next year. around ballot transformation and kind of problem reports at a polling location. So those are some just the simple ideas of some things that we're thinking about for future versions. So definitely, we always want feedback on the existing solutions, and we'll use that feedback to evolve the offerings for everyone. And we're constantly, getting that feedback through support calls, through direct engagement with customers, and other means and other channels.
Right. And let's see, an additional question, maybe Scott, this one's for you again, is how do I search for these solutions on GitHub? So if I'm looking on GitHub solutions, how do I find them?
Yeah, so all the solutions I showed you today are actually web app build, aside from one, are web app builder configurations. So you would actually get, if you needed the source code, so I guess let me just kind of get to that question a little differently. So each of the solutions that we provide come pre-configured for the workflows I showed you today, locating a voting center, finding my polling place, etc. If you wanted to, though, you could open those up within our web app builder framework or application and add additional capabilities just through the user interface without having to be a programmer. Mm-hmm. And that's a real simple way to extend them even further. But in other cases, we have that kind of for the non-developer role in the organization. But for other cases, when you are a developer and you want to go beyond what's provided in that hosted application development environment, you can get the source code for Web App Builder for ArcGIS and deploy it in a developer environment and then extend it even further. So the actual source code you'd get on GitHub is the Web App Builder Developer Edition, and you'd then host that in your environment if you needed to.
So you'd go to GitHub and search for Esri, and you'd find all our available resources.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Perfect. I think those are all the questions that we've received so far. Scott and Richard, were there additional questions or comments that you wanted to make sure we highlighted before we start to wrap up? All right, let's go. So I just wanted to kind of leave you all. There are a lot of resources available for you at esri.com. I kind of grabbed a few screenshots here, a couple screenshots that kind of show some of our resources. But if you go just to esri.com and search elections, you'll see the solutions page. You'll see kind of all of the detailed information, white papers, customer examples, links to additional resources, lots of information available there. You can also reach out to your Esri account manager for additional details, who you work with traditionally. And you can also reach out to kind of Scott and Richard or I, right? So going to list it here are all of our email addresses. You can also get to us by calling the main Esri phone number. They can track us down from there, but we're happy to help you in any way that we can. But thank you all, and have a great day.